Excited about that, but I'm not. International shipping is so completely screwed with COVID and that bloody ship that got stuck in the Suez Canal. Getting new stuff sometimes happens, I don't know, 60 to 90 to 120 days later than it ought to. These were supposed to be here about Valentine's Day. It is much later than that now, but they are here, and we're really excited about them because there's been almost nothing new coming through for Scotch. These are by Cooper's Choice. Now, these aren't one of the bottlers that we see a ton from. We only get 2 Cooper's Choice offerings a year, and we don't get tasted on these. We just get like an Excel spreadsheet of this is what's available, order what you like. There won't be extra stock, so buy what you need. As such, I buy them by how cool they sound, and some of these sound really, really cool. This Miltonduff, for example, at 51.1, aged in Imperial milk stout barrels. And the Talabardine here, that is not the Talabardine. That's the Talabardine. That's aged in Moscatel barrels. The other two here are aged in port and I believe sherry, Madeira. But yes, we are doing 4 different whiskeys. Talabardine, Ardmore, Miltonduff, and Tomatin. Done in a variety of different barrels, all a little bit different, all going to contribute something different in terms of flavor character. And also these whiskeys are not terribly, terribly expensive, so you're going to be able to do the whole tasting for 30 bucks all in. All that coming up Friday, April the 23rd at 6 o'clock, and it's going to be a lot of fun. I hope to see you out.
Wow, what energy.
Media Boutique.
Hey everyone, welcome to our Friday night whiskey tasting featuring whiskeys by the Vintage Malt Whiskey Company, which at least here we better know as Cooper's Choice. Now, Vintage Malt Whiskey Company is a independent bottler, no different from, say, Murray McDavid or Signatory or the Andrew Lang Company, or pardon me, Hunter Lang Company. Now, Cooper's Choice is actually not the biggest part of the Vintage Malt Whiskey Company's portfolio. They actually have a couple of mystery Islas. Now, I swear right hand to God, when I was setting this up, I had a bottle of the Islic on the shelf. I have Port of Skeg. So just pretend this is a bottle of Islic, because I embarrassingly don't actually have the whiskey in stock that I was going to talk about. So there is no such thing as a Port of Skeg distillery, just like there is no Islic distillery. What they do predominantly is, Isla distilleries, I guess there's 8 now, they basically buy barrels from one very quietly. They don't tell you what's actually on the label. In fact, most of the contracts they're not allowed to tell you what's actually in the bottle. And they do 2 different ones. So they do Finlagen, which is named for a ruin of a castle, which is formerly the seat of the Lord of the Isles, who was a Danish overlord of the Western Hebrides, as well as they make the Islic, which is named for the term for a person from Islic. Just like people from Lethbridge are Lethbians, people from Isla are Islics. So that's the predominant side of their business, but they also make the Cooper's Choice. Now, we've been carrying these folks for about 15 years. You probably, if you've been around for a very long time, remember these as coming in forest green, narrow cardboard boxes, including probably the most famous one, the one I still get asked about, the 1984 and 1985 Little Mills from the Cooper's Choice. But their packaging has changed a little bit. They've become a little bit bigger and nicer packaged. The bottles, I think, are a lot more interesting. And so are, they don't have Little Mills for $150 anymore, tragically. The Little Mill now is well over $600 if you want a cheap one. But they do different things. So we've got a Moscatel barrel. We've got an Imperial milk stout barrel. We have a, please God, be a port barrel. It is. And finally, we have a Madeira cask. I'm never going to live down getting that wrong during the promo. But yeah, so these are independently bottled whiskeys. So, this is a Talabardine, but so is this. Now, for a lot of you, this is going to be a review, but I do just want to cover this very briefly. So this is Talabardine, just like this is. But in this case, this is distilled at Talabardine. It's aged at Talabardine. It is packaged, marketed, bottled, every decision made at Talabardine, and they chose to release this at a 43% alcohol out of a Sauterne barrel. They also have a no-age statement. They have a sherry barrel. They have a red wine barrel. But what if you say, okay, I like Talabardine, but I'd like it maybe not out of a Sauterne cask or a red wine cask or a sherry cask, and maybe I'd like it to have an age statement so I know how old my whiskey is. maybe if you're talking about something like Miltonduff, you'd like it to have a distillery launch in North America full stop, because there isn't one. We'll get to this later, but the only official bottling for Miltonduff is actually at other distilleries owned by the Chivas brothers, or Pernod Ricard Distilling Group. They sell them in their gift shops, but there is no global release for this. So what an independent bottler does is they step in, they buy a barrel or two or three. In this case, I think all of these are pretty safely single bottle or single barrel bottlings, one of 246 bottles for the world. That's about what you get out of a single barrel. I also like the new packaging, by the way. Now let's dig right into this. So our whiskey number one is the Talabardine here. This is out of the Moscatel finish, 2011, bottled at 8 years old. Alcohol is quite high. These are cask strengths. So 55.1% alcohol on this guy. You will note that in particular, when we actually get to the highest alcohol proof, the 57.5 on the Forest Fruits Tomatin. By the way, I'm going to switch back and forth between Tomatin and Tomatin. Either is technically correct. I just go kind of back and forth between the two, but either pronunciation is more or less correct. At 55.5, this will drink neat, but you may find you want just a pinch of water in there. If nothing else, just to release the oils in the whiskey. And Kevin's just like, nope, I want it strong tonight. It's been a rough week. All right, so talk a little bit about Talabardine. This is a modern distillery. It's a 20th century distillery founded in 1949. For most of its life, it was owned by the White and Mackay Group. These are the folks who own like Black and White bottlers. They own Isle of Jura Distillery. They are, and we'll get to this for a lot of these, predominantly, first and foremost, they are a blending house. They make blended whiskey. That's what they do. And you know, here all we tend to talk about is single malt. I know out of our store, at least retail, we probably sell 18, 20 bottles of single malt for every bottle of blend we sell. We don't sell very much blended whiskey at all. But globally, blended whiskey is still a much larger portion of the market than is single malt. And the big blend that has historically been used for Talabardine is Highland Queen. Now this particular Highland Queen is actually a 16-year-old single malt that most of the information online, again, a mystery bottling, most people think this is actually a Mortlach. But the big whiskey theory is that, you know, the Highland Queen brand, most of the blended whiskey from these guys actually came from Talabardine. Hello, Steve. And Craig, I agree with you. When you and I were sampling these earlier, we both kind of thought that these really don't need water. I'm going to put a little bit in just because a drop, I think, does help. So, purchase from White. So, White Mackay owned this for a very long time. They used it to make Highland Queen, among other things. Highland Queen actually was a huge brand, kind of like Ballantine's or Johnny Walker or Famous Grouse. During the 1970s, it had a real heyday. It was actually positioned more as an upper market blended whiskey, more similar to what we'd think of as like the Chivas Regal or like the Johnny Walker Black Label range. So not like bar pour, but like a nicer blend, which now it's a category that kind of struggles because it's like, if I'm spending $50 on a blend, I could just buy a single malt. Why the hell do I want to blend at $50 or $60 or $80? And this is something that I struggle with, which is why we don't sell a lot of like Compass box whiskeys, like their Story of the Spaniard or their Peat Monster or any of that. I personally, at that price point, would rather have a single. But going back to the 1970s, when single malts were actually quite rare, like most of these whiskeys weren't even sold as a single malt back in the 1970s. And don't forget, like the classic six of Oban, Dalwhinnie, Glenkinchie, Talisker, Cragganmore, and Lagavulin 16. I can't believe I got them all right the first time. They actually weren't premiered till 1988, so we're going way back. So that's kind of the history of Talabardine. Other really neat thing about Talabardine, they were actually closed between 1994 and 2003. They were just shut. There was no whiskey distilling happening at all. So while Talabardine now looks like this in these very catchy square tubes, I remember Talabardine, when I came into the industry, they were just coming out, and Andy Dunn was repping them at the time, and I think he still does, actually. And they came in these very plain Jane, like navy blue tubes, and you could get like their 1988 whiskey, which was like a 21-year-old, for like $75, because they're paying for their purchase and reopening this distillery purely by just selling old whiskey into the market at a bit of a loss, I would think, like in terms of its value, but they just needed to raise cash to make this whole distilling dream happen. So this is an independently owned distillery, which is separate from an independent bottler, of course. When I say independently owned, we're going to talk a little bit about Diageo. We're going to talk a little about Chivas Brothers. We're going to talk a bit about Edrington Group, potentially. These are big concerns that will own 5, 10, 25 distilleries. We're actually tasting a surprising number tonight that are independently owned or relatively independent. They don't own multiple distilleries, and this is one. This is owned by Picard Vini e Spiritu, so relatively independent distillery. Okay, so that was a lot of words before we got any whiskey in our mouths at all, at least for me. Now, Moscatel barrel. Moscatel, the same thing as Muscat, the same thing as Moscato, but based on the fact that, you know, Jacob's Creek Muscat and your typical like sparkling Italian Moscato, they're not really, you know, barrel aged. What are we talking about here? Well, Moscatel is the, oh, I like that. Moscatel is the Spanish word for the Muscat grape. You'll see it in Spain, you'll see it also in Portugal a little bit. And when I see the word Moscatel, I always think of Moscatel de Setúbal. These are barrel-aged, sticky, sweet, kind of tawny brown, even into black-colored, very heavily aged dessert wines. They tend to be harvested at quite warm temperatures to like maximize that big tropical fruit kind of perfume character you get off the Muscat grapes. And then they're barrel aged in a very warm temperature, basically to encourage evaporation and really get that baked in barrel character, not too dissimilar to how, say, Madeira and Marsala are made, where you really want that warm temperature. Same thing with bourbon, to really encourage that spirit versus barrel interaction to really pull out as much barrel character as you can. Now, when you're doing that, you're also forcing a lot of wine character back into the wood to replace that barrel flavor. And as a result, it comes off with a lot of wine character coming off the barrel here. And I will always reference the great Satan, Craig, don't you worry. Diageo and Satan are always, you know, synonymous for me. And I should just preface that. Not a Satanist. I just, Diageo closed so many of my favorite distilleries between 1980 and 1994 that I think of them as kind of the Satan of the whiskey industry. Really great distilleries like Little Mill, Port Ellen, Brora. They all met their death because Diageo was basically looking at the whiskey industry and saying, we don't need all these little interesting Scotch whiskey distilleries. We'll just do what we did to the bourbon industry and the Canadian whiskey industry. We'll just farm it out to like 20 distilleries all across Scotland, and that's good enough. And they killed a whole bunch of the better distilleries in Scotland, basically as a cost savings measure. And yeah, they're now very collectible, very hard to get. It's very, very sad, really. Anyway, tasting notes on this. Kelly Stewart from Harvest Vintage Imports, who is the importer for Cooper's Choice, unfortunately had a scheduling conflict and was not able to join us. But she did send along some tasting notes here. Nose on this says sweet vanilla and caramel notes like Scottish tablet with honey. I had to look up Scottish tablet. Apparently that's like fudge, but Scottishier. Shut up, Aaron. Hashtag not a Satanist. Still better than hashtag mouthfeel. Now, I will say I get some of the sweet vanilla and caramel, but I actually get something very savory and meaty here. Almost like sweet bacon, like candied bacon. Or even more like candied salmon a little bit with that little bit of a smoke note. And smoky whiskey. We'll get to smoky whiskey in time, but yeah, it's yeah, Steve's right. Like it's grainier. It's got a real cereal thing here. I wouldn't say this is all candy all the time, which is a surprise because Moscatel barrels. We'll talk a little bit about each barrel, especially with the Miltonduff, because I've never seen that type of barrel before. Yeah, usually with Moscatel you get like the intense tropical fruit, you get the sweetness, you get the spiciness of Muscat, and yes, I do get some like desserty notes, but you know, if I was tasting this blind and didn't know, I'd probably guess sherry barrel on this, not Muscat. Or even just not wine barrel full stop. Yeah, it's not Scotchier, it's Scottishier. It's important to Important delineation. On the palates, they say dried fruit and fudge flavors, more vanilla and sweet spicy notes. And here's the problem with them writing their own tasting notes. Absolutely stunning, and for those with a sweet tooth, that's, well, we'll leave absolutely stunning out, but I would agree with for those with a sweet tooth. I think we've already seen that in the comments. Steve says it's something you could easily overdose on. Yeah, not just something I could drink too much of, but something I think would become a little too much after the second glass. I'd want to switch to something drier or spicier. This is very much like a one and done after dinner whiskey for me, just with the sweetness. Yeah, there's a real honey chocolate fudge thing here that I'm kind of grooving on. That's actually a lot of fun. Yeah, that was really interesting. Now let's get to the controversial, debatable part of tonight. Whiskeys 1 and 2. Devin and I have gone back and forth on this. The Miltonduff is unquestionably heavier. It's actually less alcohol. It's richer, it's oilier, it's fatter, it sticks around in your mouth longer, but it doesn't have the aromatic fireworks in the nose that the Talabardine does. Without looking at the tasting notes here, my big tasting notes off of this are marshmallow, particularly like marshmallow fluff, like out of the jar, coconut, and the big one for me, white chocolate. It reminds me more than anything else of like those Raffaello candies, the white ones you get from Ferrero Rocher. This really does remind me quite distinctly of that. We really went back and forth a great deal on which of these to do first. We settled on the Talabardine just because this is weightier, but I do think the Talabardine is a little louder in the nose. So I'm actually going to recommend a proper rinse of your glass and just giving your nose just a minute's break before we move on to the Miltonduff. And nobody likes a Scotch hangover, that's certainly true. I still think sour beer is a worse hangover just because of what it does to your stomach, but Scotch is right up there. Price point on the Talabardine. I cannot see because of the glare from the lights, but I want to say all of these are kind of between 92 and 110, so it's a pretty narrow band on all of these. I know this is the least expensive, the Tomatin at 92, but I can't remember off the top of my head. I apologize. I should have written that down. Okay. Let's go on to the Cooper's Choice Miltonduff Imperial Milk Stout finish. And yeah, it is very new. Let's touch briefly on what an Imperial Milk Stout is. For those of you who don't attend our beer tastings on Wednesday nights, Imperial Stouts are high alcohol stouts. The name goes back to the fact that high alcohol stouts from the British Isles were exported to the Imperial Court of Russia during the time of Catherine the Great. They tend to be big, powerful, high alcohol beers with a lot of roasty chocolate bitterness. And then when you do a milk stout version, what you're doing is you're actually adding lactose, you're adding milk sugar to give the beer kind of a coffee and cream sort of character. So they've bought a barrel that was used to age a previous Imperial Milk Stout and then aged whiskey in that cask. So very, very different casking program here. Let's jump onto our tasting notes for number 2 here. A little older whiskey at 13 years old, 304 bottles for the world. Miltonduff, a much older distillery. I believe the oldest distillery we're going to be talking about, 1824, and a very large distillery at 5.8 million liters of alcohol for the world. Talabardine makes about half that, around 3 million. Now, distilling capacity versus distilling production is kind of interesting. We are seeing two things happen. One, we're seeing a rise in single malt sales to the point where a lot of distilleries don't want to dilute their brand, and they'd rather work less shifts and make less alcohol, but sell it as a single malt, make a longer fermentation, take longer to distill it, hire a little better staff, and have a little more money to spend on barrels and like hand do every barrel rather than just pumping out a whole lot of whiskey. When we get to Tomatin, these guys actually have a distilling capacity. If they ran their distillery flat out of making 12 million gross liters of alcohol a year, they make about 2. So they're running the distillery at basically 1/6 capacity just so they can maximize quality. And no, I can't think of another milk stout finish either. On the nose for me, yeah, there's the coconut right away. Coconut right into almost like hazelnut a little tiny bit. And yeah, white chocolate. Now again, like, I'm guessing that's coming, because I've had other Miltonduffs that didn't have chocolate notes. I'm guessing the chocolate is coming from the fact it's the beer barrel, because an Imperial Stout will always be very chocolatey, or at least assuming it's well made. I'm assuming that's where it's pulling the chocolate out. And yeah, Craig, you and I are going to dispute this a little bit. Actually, I was doing a little bit of digging into Miltonduff when I was doing the research for this. Miltonduff originally actually, now owned by Chivas Brothers, but originally actually owned by Hiram Walker. Well, not originally. 1936 to 1987, Miltonduff was owned by Canadian distilling magnate Hiram Walker. He bought a whole bunch of Scotch whiskey distilleries kind of in that 1920s, 1930s period, and actually built one or two. Can't remember the name of the big one he built. But Hiram Walker was really heavily invested in the Scotch whiskey industry in that period. I mean, not the man himself. He was dead, 1899, that man passed away. But the company was very, very heavily invested in Scotch during this period. Now, this is actually a whiskey that's very heavily used in, despite being owned by Chivas Brothers, not actually used in Chivas Regal. It's not traditionally part of the blend. It is, along with Glenburgie, one of the major whiskeys behind Ballantine's blended whiskey. So Glenburgie traditionally gives you all of your light, delicate, floral, pretty, perfumey notes, whereas Miltonduff, which has a very, very steeply slanted line arm, which discourages reflux, it has a very, very oily, very grainy, very rich, very fat-based whiskey spirit, which, okay, certain examples can come off a little floral, but generally that's not Miltonduff's style. Miltonduff's style is to be very, very dense. Oh, I love Sean's comment, the Christmas snack tray. The second you said that, pretzels. Yeah, pretzels is a great call. Alcohol a little lower at 51.1. You may still want a drop of water. Memory serves, I actually don't like this with a drop of water, but I'm going to add it anyway just for good principles. What do they say in their tasting notes? Coffee notes and brown sugar, delicious roasted grains, big, rich, and complex with caramel and burnt malt, more sweetness, good length with more roasted coffee beans and malt. They keep throwing coffee in here. And I kind of get it, but to me it's coming off more like coconut. If anybody else is getting like loads of coffee off of this, please let me know in the comments, but I'm not really feeling it here. Now, having had a second to actually take a break after the very, very loud Talabardine, I really do like the Miltonduff. I think when I first tasted these, I did the Talabardine and then I immediately jumped into the Miltonduff, and I think it suffered for that. It seems very simple on the nose after following the Talabardine. But once you get it in the mouth and it has a chance to kind of slosh around your tongue and really give you everything it's got a lot going on here. It's big, it's broad, it's oily, and it's very desserty, but not in an overly sweet way. I think it has a lot of flavors that we would associate with dessert things or with kind of Christmas trays. And also, oddly enough, I'm with Steve Firth here, who I very rarely agree with. Say yes to fruitcake, absolutely. Also, I do love that we are having the great fruitcake debate in the comments. It's my tasting, so you're all wrong. Fruitcake is the best, but no, I do enjoy. I do like it. I'm impressed with how much salt is actually coming out of this. I think that's where I'm pulling pretzels, is the amount of salt. Now, Miltonduff is Speyside, so I just realized looking over my shoulder I forgot to pull out my Scotch map. Aaron, it's sitting right there. Would you grab it for me? Thank you. Let's talk a little bit about regionality here, just because I kind of forgot earlier. So this is a map of Scotland right here. I'll let you do your zoom here, Aaron. It's not quite super maps, but it'll do, damn it.
All right.
Okay, thank you. Talabardine is down here. It's actually quite far south. So here's the city of Perth. Here's the Firth of Tay. So we're down here. It's one of the closer distilleries, if not the absolute closest to the golf course at St. Andrews. Here is the Firth of Forth, which is much more important. This is the dividing line between the Highlands and the Lowlands. So we're very, very far south here. So this should not have a lot of salt. It's inland. It's fairly far south, so we don't get the big temperature swings that we do further north. It's really not next to that North Sea where we get a ton of like fresh, snappy characteristics off of. Whereas when we look at Miltonduff here, Miltonduff is up. There we go. You can tell I didn't do any map prep, by the way. It's up here in C6, so we're way up here by the city of Elgin. In fact, I know this. It's just slightly southwest of Elgin. So yeah, we're right here at Miltonduff Moscatel. So we're very close to the sea. This is kind of the hardest space out. You can see just by the number of ticks on the map. This is where most of your big distilleries are. Actually, going back to the illicit distilling days in Scotland, these guys are in the Glen of... I need to write more clearly. The Glen of Pliscarden. And there was apparently 50 illicit distilleries just in this one little glen or valley back in the illicit distilling days. So yeah, that's where we are. We're way up here where the wet sea fogs tend to roll in off of the ocean, and they give all of the whiskeys kind of this salty tang. Signing off, Kyle. No to fruitcake. Well, you know what? If we're going to lose a viewer somehow, fruitcake was not the hill I should have died on. But, you know, here we are. So, no, that's an odd duck. I love the kind of coconut thing coming off the barrel. I love how rich and spicy it is. It's got a great deal going on. What an odd, different, fascinating whiskey. I will be very honest, when I was first doing these, I was really wondering, how am I going to talk about the Miltonduff? I don't like the Miltonduff. It can't follow Talabardine. What are we going to do? No. You know what? You take a break, you take some water, you approach it clean. This has got a lot to offer. I quite like this. All right, let's move on to number 3. Oh, and Steve's getting turpentine. That's interesting. Now, I would guess that ooh, I just burped and I got exactly what he was going for there. I would guess that's coming off a little bit of a tiny peat note right at the very back, because Speyside whiskeys do tend to have a little bit of peat. Even if you can't smell or taste it, it will occasionally show up right in the finish, and peat can come off a little tiny bit turpentine. So I'm guessing that's where it comes from. Either that or they really screwed up cuts and there's some methanol in here, which let's hope not. Number 3, Tomatin or Tomatin forest fruits. Alcohol at 57.5, so this one is going to go down warm. And yet, I think of all the whiskeys, this one actually drinks the lightest. I think this is the one that I would happily sip on all night despite being almost 60% alcohol without a drop of water in it, to the point where I'm not planning on adding any to my own. This is the one, so all of these, I think it took either 1 or 2 cases of everything. The forest fruits, anytime they put a fun name on something like forest fruits or, what did they do? They did a wedding cake or something. They do really fun names occasionally. Those always turn out to be like the best of the lineup. The last 3 or 4 Cooper's Choice, we've started just swinging for the fences when they give something a fun name, and as a result, we tend to do very, very well with those. So this is Tomatin winter fruits? No, forest fruits, pardon me. Let's just flip the page. Now with Tomatin, we are back in the Highlands rather than in Speyside, and there is a Tomatin whiskey sold in Alberta, unlike Miltonduff. We're just going to use the Tomatin 12 here. There's also a 14-year-old port cask and a New Age statement that they call Legacy. This is a blend of bourbon and sherry barrels. Tomatin, at least for this market, is rep for Southern Glazers, which is owned by Bacardi. But all the reading I can do, Tomatin is also actually independently owned. It was owned by just the Tomatin Distilling Company right up until like 1986, at which point it was bought by a Japanese group just at the earliest days when the Japanese whiskey distilling industry was kind of getting going and Japanese folks were starting to invest in Scotch distilleries. They got bought out and now they're kind of their own thing. No, Devin, actually, I just agreed with you for the tasting lineup, by the way. I absolutely agree that the Miltonduff could follow the Talabardine. And yeah, whoever just said Kirsch, Nicole, yeah, that maraschino cherry spirit, absolutely. Chocolate and cherries. There's a real smoky character here. I was actually going to open with molasses when I was just sitting here sipping on it. Salt and seaweed, nori. Yeah, there's a lot going on here. Now, it's unquestionably a big whiskey at almost 60% alcohol, but even if you're shy, do try this just neat. Because that just, to me, now again, I have a fairly iron tongue because I drink a lot of whiskey neat. That stands without a drop of water added to it. I think that shows very, very well. Their tasting notes right from the distillery, 360 bottles for the world, portwood finish. Let's talk a little bit about that. Portwood tends to throw, I always say like movie theater glossettes, those milk chocolate covered raisins. I tend to get very, very sweet milk chocolate. It's pretty much the only whiskeys I get milk chocolate from are those Asian port casks. And then just like Sherry Barrel, I do get raisin. This version though, they're saying light fruity smoke with plum, red currants and spices, big and fruity with a touch of smoke, port wine and spices with juicy sweet malt, and then delicious late spices and more fruit. I can see candied fruits. I don't think, and again, you can correct me if I'm wrong here, if anybody knows, I don't think it was Cooper's Choice that did Barista's Dram. I think that was Weems. There's two companies that do kind of the fun named ones, and it's Weems and Cooper's Choice, and I think Barista's Dram was Weems. And now there's a big part of my brain that's like yelling at me saying, no, Kyle, there's a third company that does like funny names, but it's not coming to the top of my mind. It will come to me in time. And yeah, it's like a heavy blanket. It just sits down and just waits around for a while for you to appreciate it. It's like, oh, are you busy? You're just going to have a sip now while you're like watching a YouTube video? That's cool. I'll still be here in 30 seconds when you decide to pay attention to me. It's a very patient whiskey. Thank you, Steve. It was Weems. Weems that, like Cooper's Choice, I wish I could get more of because, like I said in the promo, these guys, like, I don't get tasting bottles, I don't get anything, I just get like a badly formatted Excel spreadsheet that says, hey, here's what's coming, order what you want. There won't be any extra stock if you ordered too little. It's just, you pre-order, it gets here, you get your stock. And if it's out of stock at the distillery, tough rocks. I kind of love that and hate that at the same time. I love that because it kind of challenges me as a whiskey buyer because I don't get the, the soft, comfortable, baby's first whiskey buying experience of actually getting to taste the whiskeys. No. You have to buy it off a spreadsheet and just kind of go with like, okay, I know this whiskey usually is fine at young ages, which is why I buy a lot of Ben Nevis's. Ben Nevis in particular drinks really well young. So whenever I see like a young Ben Nevis, I'll pick it up because I love Ben Nevis young. Whereas something like Strathisla, I really, really like Strathisla, but Strathisla to me never really shows very well under 13, 14, so I'm much fussier about buying it. Does that mean I occasionally miss out some exceptional Strathislas that are younger? Does it become a self-fulfilling prophecy because I never buy them? Yes, it does. But also, you kind of have to go with what you know. So, a sunny backyard, a bag of cheesies, and a scotch. Yep. Oh, what was that? The cluster. It was like mandarin cluster or orange cluster or citrus cluster. Yeah, it was something like that. It was a Glenrothes. And I can't remember what that was. It didn't last very long. It sold out in like 2 nights. There's something I'm really trying to nail down here. And it's coming off like cedarwood or cigar. It's definitely something in here that's like teriyaki beef jerky mind, but that's not what I'm looking for. Yeah, regardless, sweet and salty, and that was the least expensive thing in the range. I really liked this. I thought that was an exceptional whiskey. Well done again to Cooper's Choice with that one. Okay, so let us quickly run through Shameless Promotion Corner, because we do have some new stuff coming up, of course. We have a Wednesday night and a Friday night tasting next week. Wednesday night's really fun. We're actually, for the very first time, going to taste Superflux on the channel. Superflux, for those of you who don't know, is an incredibly popular, super limited brewery out of Vancouver. How it works with Superflux is I don't get to just order it. They tell me when I'm going to get it. I have to take everything they're releasing, and I have to take 4 flats of everything. If I don't take that, I get taken off the list, and that's it. So Superflux, when we put it on like Instagram, we put it on Facebook, like we have a stampede of people coming in for it because it's just so red hot right now. I said, okay, let's put that up against Strathcona, because Strathcona's not quite as like hardcore geeky, but really close. So this tasting was originally supposed to just be Strathcona, but in like the hour and a half between Strathcona coming out and being launched and us turning around and ordering it, 2 out of the 4 beers is already sold out. So it's getting right there. Both from Vancouver, each has a pale ale and an IPA, both like the absolute bleeding edge, red hottest stuff that we can get out of Vancouver. And we're just gonna put them head to head because it sounds like fun. Maybe not gonna be a lot of like technical teaching on this one, but we're gonna get to drink some really crazy stuff that we don't get to keep in, we certainly can't keep in stock, and we don't even get in stock very often. This is purely just like a hedonism event, and it's gonna be a lot of fun for that. On the wine side, just more hedonism. As you all know, I'm a giant fan of South African wine. Our 3rd ever wine tasting that we did with the video tasting series was South Africa. And we're going to go back to the well about a year later because South Africa remains amazing. We will be doing a white, an orange wine, and 2 reds. Kind of talking about a little bit of South African history and a little bit of current South African winemaking. To talk about the history, South Africa's history can basically be summed up as it was a whole bunch of co-ops, they didn't make very good wine, and they had a whole bunch of Chenin Blanc. So we're going to taste like an inexpensive $12 Chenin Blanc. This is a very good example of that, but it also kind of speaks to if you were drinking South African wine between 1970 and 2010, 2015, this is kind of what South African wine was to the world. Were there more interesting things going on? Yes, but as like a broader export market, this is kind of where South Africa began and ended. This is kind of in the vein of Two Oceans Sauvignon Blanc, except I hate that wine. And it features Chenin Blanc, which is so important in South Africa. Then we're going to jump into an orange wine, and we go with kind of 3 of the, I think, most interesting South African producers we get in Inteligo, Silwervis, and Craven. So we're going to do a orange Pinot Gris. We're going to be doing a non-vintage dry red from Silwervis in their Smiley line with these terrifying kind of skinless sheep head labels. I don't entirely understand. And then finally the Kadungu by Inteligo, which is kind of their least expensive wine. Most of the stuff from Inteligo is kind of $30 plus. This is kind of like their everyday red at kind of $24, $25. I really like it. Going to be a fun lineup, just talking about some South African stuff, because I'm not going to stop doing South African focuses until we start selling more South African wine, because in terms of value, it's right there with like Austria-Hungary as being the best values in the shop right now. So we're going to talk about that again. And yeah, it is some kind of label lineup, isn't it? It's very loud. Okay, so let's move into Ardmore here. Now, Ardmore is a peated Highland. So when we talk about peaty whiskey, we are generally speaking about the Isle of Islay. These are whiskeys that have kind of 10 to 55 or more parts per million of phenol, and it has this distinct smoky, peaty, some people find it bitter, some people find it spicy, wood smoke, oily smoke character. Now, it can be all over the map in how much smoke you add. It can be all over the map in terms of what flavor profile you get. Like I find Bowmore is very hammy, sausagey, clean campfire smoke, whereas Lefroy smells like you're burning old railroad ties and tires. The peat smoke character can be all over the map. Traditionally, it all comes from one island off the southwest coast of Scotland called Islay, but there are some inland distilleries that do it. Ardmore is kind of the oldest one. They've been doing it since like the 1890s. They've been making whiskey in this style since at least the 1940s in the heavy peat style. It's just their signature. Now these days there's lots and lots of distilleries that are doing kind of peated Islas, including like Tomatin here. They make a peated version called Cabocan. Edredor makes their Balakan series. Even Glenfiddich has their bloody Fire and Cane where they use a peated whiskey. But really, if we're talking about, you know, peated whiskeys that aren't from Islay, you know, the buck kind of stops with Ardmore. This is out of Madeira finish. I absolutely adore Madeira finishes, just period, and I've always liked Ardmore. So I expect that this is likely to be my favorite of the lineup, even though I really like the forest fruits. Yeah, Steve just jumps in right away with a really good tasting note. The Madeira casking, the peat's gone sweet and slightly cheesy, and he's not wrong. Yeah, cheddar. Cheddar into blue cheese. Then you get that really pretty kind of lightly oily cedarwood smoke. It's a lot to like that. This is really a whiskey that's very much to my palate. I love Madeira casking. I love peated whiskey. Yeah. So now, if you know me well at all, you know that I do occasionally like less expensive whiskey because I certainly cannot afford to actually drink the palate that I would like to drink. I really like Teacher's Highland Cream. I still think this is the best, not just bang for your buck blended whiskey, but just the best blended whiskey overall. And yes, I'm including Johnny Walker Blue because Johnny Walker Blue is fucking terrible. Teacher's Highland Cream, the base of that is Ardmore. It's a peated whiskey base, but it's not a strictly smoky blend like, say, Black Grouse or Black Bottle. It's got a peaty component, but it's way in the background. Now this just, it's got such beautiful, like, somebody said banana, Steve did, and now banana's in my head for a tasting note, and it's wrong, there's no banana to this. I get leather, I get salt, I get like pretty clean wood smoke. There's none of that oily smoke here really. I do get that dry white pepper that I traditionally get from Madeira cask, and then that kind of leans onto like, not quite fruit roll up, not quite, maybe dried ginger, some sort of dried fruit, dried spice character. More than anything, it reminds me of like your grandparents' spice cabinet where they had all these like clubhouse spices from the 80s and then they never really used them all, but the cupboard smells like slowly dying spices in a very particular way. This reminds me of that sort of aroma. It reminds me of like a spice cupboard that hasn't really opened except to get salt and pepper out for 10 years. And in the mouth, there's a little bit of smoke in the nose, but get it on the mouth and there's the smoke. It just opens up. It just rolls across the tongue. There's the charcoal, there's the wood, there's the leather, there's the salt, there's the beef jerky, there's not even beef jerky, there's just like fresh pepper steak right there. It's got this incredible savory component to it that I really like. Interestingly, Ardmore only makes this spirit about 60% of the time. As I was talking about with these, and distilleries kind of cutting back their production to satisfy like the blending industry, they don't want to do that anymore. Not just because the blending industry is kind of vanishing a little bit. I actually did dig up an interesting statistic. Between 2011 and 2017, blended whiskey as a global category shrank 18%, and in that same period, single malt grew 23%. So that's 5-year-old data, and at least from what we're seeing here, that's, if not just continued at the same rate, ramped up even more. But Ardmore does produce a second whiskey, so 60% of it is done as this 14 to 16 parts per million phenol peaty Highland whiskey, but the other 40% is actually a whiskey called Ardblair that I've never seen offered for sale anywhere, not as an independent bottling, never. It's just, I've never seen it. It's an unpeated version of this, purely for blending. I've never seen it offered anywhere else. Steve, we can't be friends anymore. Grants? Oh man, I hate Grants. Grants is just vinegar. Like for me, give me Teachers, then Black Bottle, then probably Ballantines. Not Ballantines. Probably, well, if we're talking big brands, sure, the Ballantines. But I also say the Adelphi, which is a little tiny company, they make like a $28 blended Scotch. It's very, very good. But yeah, me and Grants are not friends. Also, look, my video on my phone's been frozen for like the last 25 minutes, which is great. Hopefully everyone else has seen video. We'd have complaints if we hadn't. I was more just poking fun. Okay, rankings. Ooh. Okay. Initially, before I did this, it was pretty clearly like 1, 2, 3, giant falling off a cliff, 4. Now, ooh. I'm actually going to go in inverse order. 1, 2, 3, 4. I really love this Ardmore. It speaks to me. It's exactly what I like, and it's like exactly what I've always liked. I will say, I think that this lost a little bit just by the process of putting it in little bottles, or maybe the bottle that my little bottle came from was not the best bottle going, but this out of the bottle, like the big bottle, straight into a glass, was absolutely unbelievable. This little bottle was very, very good. This, to me, tonight is exceptional. This is very good. This is just educational. I learned so much from this whiskey. I love it for that. Of all of these, the one I would probably buy is this, just because I want to keep coming back to it and learning. This was loud and lovable and just joyful, and if anybody has this as their number one, I do not dispute that at all. This is probably the easiest one for me to sell just because it's so incredibly likable. But for me, I think I enjoyed the other 3 more. Let's see where the rankings are coming in. Balvenie Doublewood is Chris's go-to. That's a really good, solid go-to. I don't think I have a go-to anymore, which is really sad. I mean, if we had a good everyday Kleinlish here, that would probably be my go-to. You know what, Glenmorangie Nectar d'Or. If you know, somebody's saying, hey Kyle, I'm at Safeway Liquor and I need to get you a bottle of Scotch for your birthday. It'd probably be that. Like a generally available, broad listed single malt that everybody would know. That's probably the closest for me. Danuta has 4312, so they're right with me. Steve has 3241. Kevin has 4123, and Elizabeth 4312. Nicole is 2 and 3 in first place, then 4 and 1, 2, 3, 1, 4. Carolyn, very numerically correct, has 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm guessing Carolyn is not a fan of Pete. And see if I disagree. I think the Ardmore is actually quite special. I enjoy this more than most Ardmores. I will also, I've touched on this for all the others, Ardmore does have a distillery bottling. They call it the Legacy. And it's really good value. Ardmore Legacy is like $53.95, which is crazy good value considering we're now living in a world where like Bowmore 12 is $60. I think that's great value for what it is. I'll always respect Ardmore. Aaron, I normally ask you for your rankings, but you've got things to do tonight, so you're not drinking tonight.
Don't worry about me, man.
You got this all under control.
Just in, yeah.
You're just in production mode.
Yep. Production mode.
Perfect. Sean has them actually in the exact inverse order, 4, 3, 2, 1. But you bought a bottle of 3 and not sorry, good, because I think I was the one who recommended that to you, so good. Jeremy is 1, 4, 2, 3. That's a beautifully kind of counterintuitive ranking that I completely agree with. I can see where you'd have that ranking. To me, they all do different things. Like, if you like peaty whiskey and you like Madeira castings like me, that. This doesn't show as well out of a little bottle. I think that this whiskey could run the table if it was out of the full bottle for everybody. This is just fascinating. And this is usually the style of whiskey that I would buy more of because it's loud and it's likable and everyone would enjoy it. And it's at 55.5, no chill filtration, no caramel addition. It's geeky enough for the geeks and likable enough for people who are, you know, normally Glenfiddich drinkers. I think it's a great all-rounder. So, Yeah, it's a good lineup. There's also Macduff 16-year that we are not including tonight because I only got one case of it, and we sold like 2 the day they arrived, so we only had 4 left, and we'd have had to open 2 for this. So, yeah, that didn't get opened. But there is an upper end for this one around $150. But yeah, and you're right. The rankings are very varied, Eric. I kind of like when they're not kind of all the same, and I'm trying to be less, well, slightly less openly biased about what I like and what I don't. I'm trying to find the good in everything. Now, I can't find the good in things I openly hate, and I never will. But I'm trying to be a little more even-handed sometimes, where if I don't understand something, and also dial this back another step, with beer, I generally understand the styles because they're simpler. But with something like Miltonduff, where there's no distillery bottling, there's no like generally available, just buy it off the shelf Glenlivet version of it. Who am I to say that's a bad Miltonduff? I don't know. I've had 6 Miltonduffs from 6 different bottlers over 21 years. I don't know. I don't know as well as anybody does. I have no idea. How can I say that's a bad Miltonduff? I can talk about it against the other things on the table. I can talk about it against, the couple of Miltonduffs I've had. I can talk about it being a milk stout. But, when it comes to like East Coast versus West Coast IPAs, where I've had generally literally hundreds of examples, I have a little more background. How can I talk about this being a bad Miltonduff when I've had like 4 to 6 over 20 years? I try to be a little more even-handed because I do know when I'm out of my depth. All right, we'll do one last check for questions. I like the new packaging, Steve. I actually, I know it's just good memories of those 84 and 85 Little Mills, which were special. And it was very green. And you know what? I will say there were some dodgy Coopers. I will say that the low ebb for them, I think that most of the bottlings I've had in this series have been great. I would say that I at least have fond memories, considering it's probably 10 years ago since the green box era, and I thought those were pretty great. But when they came in those weird, like, metallic blue... Shut up. When they came in those weird metallic blue tubes, they had some distinct misses. Not to the point of, like, the entry-level signatories, but that blue tube series, there was definitely some times where I had a Cooper's Choice that was like, I'd have been happier not having this. I think they've really upped their minimum quality across the line. Only 84. Yeah, I think they're very consistent now, Craig. I think that's very fair. Laverne has 3, 4, 2, 1. It's an interesting ranking. And Pete and Cheryl have the Ardmore as 1. Miltonduff is 2. That's fun. Tully 3 and the Tomatin 4. All right, Pete. I'll be interested to ask you about that ranking later. All right, I think we're going to wrap things up there. Wednesday for Best of Vancouver head-to-head, and Friday next week for South Africa. For Andrew Hilton, I've been Kyle. That's been Aaron.
Hi.
And yeah, we will see you guys Wednesday or Friday next week. Thank you so much for tuning in, and have a wonderful weekend.